Hello, everyone. It's that time of year again for the BRICS conference. So here is this year's 2024 update. So we're going to explore the BRICS alliance, and it's been a very, very significant year this year because it marks a new phase for the BRICS with expanded membership, ambitious goals for reshaping the global order, and also, if you remember last year, Vladimir Putin couldn't attend due to the international arrest warrant. So this year it was held in Kazan in Russia and afforded him the opportunity to put himself back onto the global stage. So let's just have a quick look at what the expanded BRICS looks like. Not quite as big as they were hoping. It's 10 countries now, but that's a substantial block. It's 45% of the global population, around 23%, just short of a quarter of the world's total GDP. And initially, as we know, it was just the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now it's grown with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia. Argentina were due to join, but at the very, very last minute, following an election of a right-wing government in Argentina in November of 2023, they were due to join on the 1st of January 2024. Javier Milei, the new president, withdrew. He is he ran on a very anti-Chinese um, message. He described them as assassins and communists. Um, and he's even talked about dropping the peso and using the dollar. And he's seen as very much Washington leaning, which is a bit of a blow to the BRICS. Argentina is a growing economy and is very, very close to some of the other countries in terms of the amount of trade it has. So 10 instead of 11, but still, as we've said, a substantial block covering 45% of the world's population. It was held in Kazan, which is, as you can see, in Russia, as we mentioned before. It allowed Putin to attend, and it really did showcase how they see the BRICS bloc now developing in the future in terms of economic independence, political cohesion, and moving maybe outside of the traditional spheres that they've been confined to previously. So the main communique that comes out of it is the Kazan Declaration. And the Kazan Declaration kind of focuses on five main areas. The first is um, opposition to sanctions, which they're very, very strong on. They believe that the international community basically means the G7, the Western community, and they are condemned Western sanctions that and tariffs that are impacting countries such as Russia and China. And they say that there should be more equitable international rules, and that these are unilateral restrictions outside of the global financial order. They also want a reform of global governance, and they're expanding this. We know before that they've talked about the New Development Bank as a competitor for the World Bank, but they're actually looking at broader reforms of global governance, including the United Nations. They want UN reform. They're highlighting the need for more equitable influence of developing nations in decision making. They're wanting a revamp of the Security Council. They believe that the UN is just another arm of the West and how it suppresses developing countries and emerging economies. They're also wanting to look at changes to financial systems and also, again, moving away from Western controlled financial systems. There also was a renewed commitment to development projects and development strategies in developing countries. And they also moved into the political sphere by making joint declarations about their assertions on certain geopolitical positions, and we'll break some of these down. First of all, in terms of economic independence, we know that there's an existing kind of alternative being produced by the BRICS. So the New Development Bank we know is an alternative to the World Bank in terms of long-term investment and development. We know that the CRA, the Contingency Reserve Arrangement, um, is a competitor to the IMF in terms of injecting cash into failing or struggling economies. And we know that both of those have been established by the BRICS countries, modest in size compared to the World Bank and the IMF, but still in principle um, operate in a kind of parallel system. And also now what they've done is they've introduced something which we call BRICS Clear. So the declaration expressed strong support for the establishment of BRICS Clear, which will facilitate cross-border transactions without relying on Western-dominated systems, particularly SWIFT. I don't think it's any accident that SWIFT was being discussed as maybe a tool for the West to use in in restricting trade and financial arrangements for Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. And it focuses on financial resilience within the BRICS group through currency swaps and diversified trade practices. So really a continuation and an expansion, if you like, of this economic independence away from Bretton Woods and subsequent Western dominated structures. There was also support for a new development model. The new development bank we know was established right back in 2014. It's 10 years old this year, and it continues to play a vital role. And at the conference, they really expressed and emphasized the need for the development bank to support infrastructure and sustainable projects in developing nations as an alternative to IMF and World Bank loans, which they believe apply restrictive conditions on emerging economies. So, in terms of economic goals, this was a Russia wanted to introduce a grain exchange program. So looking at improving and solidifying supply chains in terms of food supply within the BRICS countries. But also leaders reasserted their commitment to development within the BRICS, and also the new development bank offering having a model of offering loans and developmental loans to other developing nations so that they wouldn't have to go to the World Bank or IMF, which have been seen by the BRICS as being restrictive. So you can see the new development bank's beautiful building there in Shanghai in China. They do overlap with existing structures, as you can see there. I took from one of their web pages a document where they talked about how they primarily tried to work with 11 out of the 17 SDGs. And, and contrary to maybe what we see in the West, very big investors in sustainable technologies and sustainable development in many poorer developing countries. In terms of peace and security, they reiterated through the Kazan Declaration the position on various conflicts, wanting reiterating their support for Russia in its conflict in Ukraine. But they expressed obviously concern about this conflict and advocated for a diplomatic solution to that. They also talked about the Middle East, which, although the Middle East you might think seems to be outside of their remit, of course, with Iran now joining the BRICS family, then what you can see is that they're very much invested in peace and security in that area, which essentially forms the southern border to Russia, western borders with India, and is an important geopolitical standpoint. They also committed their support to the Palestinian 1967 borders, condemning what they perceive to be illegal occupation by the Israelis. So a little move into kind of political areas, which is something quite new. So we've seen the BRICS expand their size and their influence during this recent conference and over the last 12 months, and therefore we have to start to really analyze the question: are they a viable alternative to the existing Western-based world order? Well, they do still continue to face huge challenges. They've got very, very different economic models, hugely divergent economies. China and India, significant growth drivers, but Russia, Brazil, South Africa still struggling, really. But really, China's economic dominance is the story here. And as we can see now, the BRICS is developing petrochemical and hydrocarbon-based economies, um, some kind of more rural economies, as well as the developing high-tech economy in places like India. So these hugely divergent economic models that the countries have is a challenge for them when it comes to coherence. There are still limitations to their institutions, such as the New Development Bank, the CRA, in terms of their size. They don't really have strong institutional frameworks like people like the UN or even the Bretton Woods agreements have. There's still a lot of diverse interests in there, and um, they don't really have strong infrastructure in terms of their frameworks that they use. So they also depend mostly on commodity exports. Many of the countries in there are still dependent on commodity exports, which are subject to price fluctuations, rapid market changes. And of course, increasingly for some countries, the influence of climate change. So that also is kind of feels like it's placing a little ceiling on development at the minute. And we now obviously have diverse member interests. We've got a wide range of geopolitical issues now with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia joining, the potential for fragmentation, um, particularly between Iran and Saudi Arabia over proxy wars in the Middle East. And this reduces the effectiveness of the BRICS to really have strong leverage and uh, and its capacity to act as a cohesive unit is somewhat weakened. Interestingly, Jim O'Neill, the grandfather, if you like, of the BRICS, the guy who coined the terms, was interviewed um, around this time to give his view on the expansion. There was some talk of a common currency, which he slammed as, in his words, ridiculous due to this diversity within the BRICS groups and this lack of cohesion, both economically and politically, within there. And he's also voiced he's expressed skepticism. I would say the word is skepticism over the effectiveness of them to counterbalance Western influence. Because of these internal divisions, China's economic dominance, some increased tensions between India and China themselves. And he's also critiqued their attempts to expand. He didn't think they were ready. Countries like Iran, Ethiopia, UAE and he feels like this expansion lacks some strategic coherence. He's not sure whether these new countries are going to add any kind of influential strength to the group. He remains highly critical of early notions for a common currency because that's going to be improbable without much, much, much closer economic and political ties. If we compare it to the EU, for instance, with its common currency and the journey the EU went on of this deepening as a trade bloc, and BRICS is still a long, long way away from there. He also expressed concerns about China's economic slowdown, wondering whether there was going to be the kind of economic stagnation nations like Japan have seen. And although he admits they will become increasingly vocal in global affairs, he's not. He's expressed a skepticism that they will really have the level of influence that they're hoping to have. So overall, that's the analysis of the BRICS conference of 2024. It all comes down to the same old story, which is just how are the BRICS managing to carve out um, an alternative global governance model. It was always an interesting economic bloc. It's now broadening out its size, its membership, and its diversity, and therefore potentially its lack of cohesion, but it still is 45% of the world's population and 23% of the world's GDP. Two important statistics to remember there. It's too big to ignore, but whether it's in a position to really start to make an influence and have any kind of broader global governance impact is for you to decide. Okay, thanks very much.